Gambling is any game or activity in which someone risks money or something else of value in hopes of winning money. This can include scratch off games, lotteries, bingo, dice, card games, casino games, um, internet gambling games, and then of course sports betting. The people's voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the people's voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the people's voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. It is greatly appreciated. As always, and I'm never going to stop saying it, I always want to start with thank you. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to the podcast. Thank you for the support, the comments, and to anyone who's new to the podcast, thank you for checking us out. And hopefully we can provide some information today that you can either utilize or share. And that's the purpose of the podcast, is to provide information and inspiration, and also have that information shared, because information that is not shared is just wasted, and so we don't want to waste that information, and that is the purpose of our podcast here. So today I want to talk about a topic that has gotten a little bit of national attention. It was kind of like a quick blur, but then it quickly got kind of pushed under the rug. So I want to talk about that today, to hopefully re-engage that conversation. And those of you who are listening will spread that information so we can begin to tackle this issue. The issue I want to talk about today is teen gambling, teenage gambling. And specifically, I want to talk about teenage sports gambling. And the reason I want to talk about that is because I was doing some research, obviously for the podcast, and I came across this information about the increased amount of gambling that teenagers are doing today. You have all of these different ways to access gambling, obviously, that those of us of an older generation did not have. And then, the accessibility of it on top of that has created quite an issue today here in the country. So I wanted to talk about that and kind of walk through some of the nuances of sports gambling, also teenage gambling, talk a little bit about some of the concerns that many child psychologists have kind of noted, and then also want to obviously talk about prevention and tips on how to address the issue if you know of a teen or someone within your family that has teenagers, or if you have teenagers yourself that are dealing with this problem. So that's what I want to talk about today, teenage gambling. So for this, I think I will start with, I'll start with a definition. You guys who listen to me regularly know I like to start with definitions. So I want to give a definition for gambling. And I know many people might be thinking, well, do you really have to give a definition for gambling? But, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? Until you get that information. There might be somebody out there who may have an assumption of what it is, but I like to give definitive or give definitions regarding the topics that we're going to discuss today. So let me give a definition for gambling. And I was doing research, and this is from an article from Edweek, and they did a highlight. They highlighted this issue as well in July about teenage gambling. But here it says, gambling is any game or activity in which someone risks money or something else of value in hopes of winning money. This can include scratch-off games, lotteries, bingo, dice, card games, casino games, internet gambling games, and then, of course, sports betting. So that's what gambling is. It's any activity or game which someone risks money or something else of value in the hopes of winning money. That's gambling. So let's now elevate the conversation. So, with that understanding, we are now here in the United States, as I said before, we're seeing an increase in gambling amongst teenagers. Matter of fact, I was reading a report from Pew Research did an article as well on this, and they are quoting a study that was done by the National Council on Gambling or National Council on Problem Gambling. And in that report, this council noted that based on their surveys, that they are seeing a significant increase in gambling amongst teenagers. Here it says, and I'm reading from the article, it says, although the legal age for gambling ranges from 18 to 21, depending on state, between 60 and 80% of high school students report having gambled for money in the past year. And this is, again, according to the National Council on Problem Gambling. And a lot of this increase was a result of the pandemic. Obviously, more people were home during the pandemic. Parents are like, hey, figure out something to do. You can't go outside. So everybody was on their phones or on their laptops or on their desktops, whatever, on their iPads, their tablets, and it is accessible for them to get to these platforms. And so as a result of that, over the past year, right, because you're dealing with kind of the wave of the addiction, if you will, because it is a form of addiction, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. But you start doing something during the pandemic, and now we're a year and a half, technically, so to speak, a year out of the pandemic, and now you're starting to see the results of some of the habits that were picked up during the pandemic, and teen gambling is one of them. And a lot of this is associated with sports gambling. And that's what I wanted to talk about specifically, because sports gambling really is the catalyst for a lot of what we're seeing now amongst teenagers that are dealing with sports gambling, especially young people. It also goes on to say that, and I'm quoting directly from the council, Keith White from the National Council on Problem Gambling. He says, we believe that the risk for gambling addiction overall have grown 30% from 2018 to 2021, with the risk being mostly amongst males that are in the age group of 18 to 24. Those are usually the ones that have bet the most during this overall period. And the reason why that's a very important point is because in 2018, there was a huge change in sports betting. In 2018, the Supreme Court basically ruled that there was a ban against, sports betting in states. Previous to the ban being struck down in 2018, Nevada and a couple of other states were really the only states where you could do sports betting legally, and that's key. Not saying it wasn't being done, but legally. And actually, let me talk a little bit about that. So in 2018, there was an act called the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act. And this act was basically signed into effect in 1992, 93 by the first George Bush when he was president, and George H. Bush, just to be specific. And when he signed this into effect, sports gambling was already illegal, right, from a federal standpoint. And this is kind of similar to the conversation that we're having now with marijuana. But in 1992, there was really only one state that was having sports betting, and basically it was still illegal federally. But if you wanted to bet on sports, most people went to Nevada. In 1992, George H.W. Bush, just want to be specific, signs the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, right? That's commonly known as PASPA. And when he signs that, basically it bans sports betting in all states except for Nevada. And there were like three others. I think it was like Oregon, Delaware, and one of the other Montana. But those three states was on a limited basis. So anyway, he signs this bill, goes into effect, and sports betting is illegal in all states except for those. Well, obviously, people are looking at the revenue that Nevada is bringing in, and some of these other states that were grandfathered into the signing of this act, and they're like, wait a second, these guys are making money over here. This is big time money when it comes to betting. And states kind of fought for it, especially states that already had other forms of betting, like New Jersey. New Jersey, Atlantic City, for those who know, was a big betting town, a big gambling town with plenty of casinos and things of that nature. So you had states fighting. Anyway, let me speed up the conversation. So in 2018, the case went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court strikes it down, says no, sports betting is now legal in all states, right? As federally. Now, because it becomes legal means that now tax revenue can be collected federally as well. So just so everybody's understanding. So it struck down in 2018. Then this is when you start seeing the launch of all of these companies, right? So your DraftKings, your FanDuels. If you notice, you're seeing all these commercials about bet this and bet that. This is a result of the 2018 ruling, the Supreme Court ruling that basically struck down the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act and made betting legal in all states. Now, even though betting has become legal in all states, only I think it's about 30 or 31. Even though sports betting, let me be specific, even though sports betting has become legal in all states, only 30 or 31 right now are currently participating in sports betting. So I have to give that information because it correlates directly to what I was talking about before. And again, my topic today is about teenage gambling and the increase of teenage sports gambling in particular. Going back to the article from Pew Research, as I noted, they said that they saw an increase, and this is Keith White from the National Council on Problem Gambling. Keith White says, and he's the executive director over there, he said, we believe that risk from gambling addiction overall have grown 30% from 2018 to 2021. And again, once that act was struck down in 2018, that opened up the floodgates, and now we have a tremendous amount of gambling amongst teens. So why is this an issue, right? Big deal, right? Some people I know listening saying, so what? It's you bet on a sports game. What's the big deal? Well, the problem is that young people obviously are still in the developmental stage, right? Especially when you're talking about teenagers, and not to go off into a medical tangent because I'm not a professional, but they're still in the developmental stage. Matter of fact, let me play a clip from GMA. This is Good Morning America. And Dr. Fong from UCLA, he talked about this particular issue and talked about teens not being fully developed as yet. So let's play that and then I'll continue.
Exposure can lead to gambling addiction.
Teenagers and young people are significantly at higher risk of developing gambling disorder than adults, in part because their brains are not fully developed. Their ability to evaluate risk, their ability to handle loss isn't as secure as an adult.
So that's why this is a major issue, right? Because as the doctor just said, teenagers don't have that ability to deal with the rush or the disappointment that comes with betting, right? Because that's part of the addiction, right? Just like any other addiction, that rush that you may feel if for people that do drugs or have done drugs or alcohol or things or anything of that nature, that rush and all that disappointment, the come down, if you will, teenagers still are in developmental stages. They don't have the ability to accurately deal with those peaks and valleys, which then can lead to other issues, which I'll talk about a little bit as I move on here. But this is why it's important that we address this issue, start having these conversations amongst our families, our communities, and in our children. Also, let me play one more clip as well. This is Dr. Chirella from, this is a clip from WFMJ in Youngstown, Ohio. And he talks about not only the rush, but also the increase in the number of teenagers that have begun to get involved in sports betting. So let me play that, and then I'll continue as we move on here. So
truly is at stake?
Well, yeah, and we know that gambling can be an addiction just like drugs or tobacco, alcohol, because there's a rush. I mean, when you win, it activates certain parts of the brain, and then you continue to want to have that rush. And so it can become pathological quite quickly. I read a statistic, Steve, that this is true, that of all the millions of people that are addicted to gambling, at least half of them are adolescents.
Wow.
That's startling. I mean, that is really alarming to me. We know that anywhere from 4 to 8% of adolescents, teenagers have a serious problems with gambling.
And that's definitely alarming to all of us, right? So again, to reiterate, this is Dr. David Chirella. He is a child psychologist. Over 50% of gamblers here in the United States are of teenage age. That's disturbing on so many levels. And obviously, again, as the doctor said, that rush that the teenagers get, or any gambler gets, is similar to the same addiction with any other types of substance abuse, whether it's marijuana or alcohol or cocaine, you name the drug, heroin, you can go down the list. It's the same thing, right? It's the fix, so to speak, that you get addicted to, and then it becomes a huge problem. So again, want to talk about this today because I think that there's been coverage here and there. It's been spotty, but I want to make sure that we're highlighting this and we're having the conversations in our communities, in our families, as we all grapple with this issue. So now that we kind of discussed what the issues are, let's talk a little bit about the signs, right? Because it may, sometimes, just like with any other addiction, some people are great at hiding it, right? You may not know that your teen or the teens in your community or in your family, that they have an addiction to gambling. So let's go through some of the signs to find out, or some of the signs that can alert you to the fact that a teen may have a gambling problem. And this comes from youthgambling.com that deals with supporting teenagers that have developed gambling addictions and things of that nature. So there's a list here, but I'll go through a few so you can maybe spot this. And then, of course, we'll put a link to this. Let's put a link to this on the YouTube. When we post this on YouTube, we'll put a link to this as well if you want to be able to click on that. But it's at youthgambling.com. Excuse me. So the signs. Sign number one, they begin to sell personal things, right? And it might be something as simple as, hey, I sold my sneakers to a friend, to, I sold the whole game unit to a friend. And you're like, well, why are you selling your stuff? What's going on here? Let's start to ask some of those questions. Why are you selling things that personally belong to you? And again, it's not just, one or two items. It's like when you start to notice that, hey, it's every week this is gone or that's gone, that might be a sign that your teen is involved in gambling and trying to get up money to gamble. Now, again, it could be a sign of other things as well. But today we're just talking about teenage gambling. So, number two, borrows money from friends and family and does not pay it back or does not have the ability to pay it back. Now, not all teens have the money, right? All of us as parents, we know that, sometimes teenagers will come to you and say, can you give me, can I have? And that's natural, right? Especially for those who are not working. But if it becomes a regular occurrence, and when you say, well, how are you going to give me this money back? And they just give you I'll get it back to you. It's like, and they're not working, or if they are working and they still can't pay it back to you, then, there might be a problem here. Let's look into this. Let's start asking some questions. So number two, borrows money from friends and family, unable to pay it back. Number three is steals and lies. And, that's definitely when you're starting to get a heightened concern, right? When your child or the person in the young individual in your community or in your family that has a sports betting addiction begins to steal, then we and then lie about it when all of the evidence is kind of been calculated. Now we have a huge problem, and we need to really, really dig deep to see what's going on with there. I'm gonna, kind of move through the rest of these, because like I said, there's a number of them. I don't want to go through all of them, but I think the big one here is has a great deal. Well, number one, has large amounts of money, and that can be associated with many different things, but that may be a sign. But I think in terms of body language, I think this particular sign that they talk about here, and again, this is from youthgambling.com, they talk about appears to be distracted, anxious, constantly moody or depressed. This is definitely a sign that, again, some of these signs, I know people are listening like, well, that could be anything, but there's a pattern to it, right? There's a reoccurrence of these type of behaviors. And so when it appears on a consistent basis, you definitely want to start the process of trying to figure out what's going on. So it says appears distracted and anxious, often moody or depressed. And again, kind of like the two doctors said, in terms of the rush of sports gambling or gambling in general, that same rush that any addict of any other substance that might be involved in, whether that's, again, the various substances, cocaine, alcohol, so on and so forth, that same rush that brings them up will bring them down. That same rush in anticipation of winning brings them up, makes them anxious. Same feeling of losing depresses them, brings them down. So you want to keep an eye out on that with teens that are gambling. And then the last but not least that I wanted to cover was obsession with sports scores can indicate a sports gambling habit, and that's key. There's a difference between you just watching the game for entertainment and then you're watching the game because you have money on the game, right? And now with these sports betting apps, you can do so much in terms of betting, right? It's no longer just bet, whether the team will win or lose. I mean, some of these apps you can bet on every basket. You can bet on the score at the end of each quarter. You can bet on the individual player and how many points that player will have or how many touchdowns. And it's really, really can get addictive. And how they design these apps, it makes it super user friendly. So, one click and all of a sudden, you're betting, and all you need is a credit card. And a lot of times, not going too much into it, but a lot of times when these kids do have this addiction, they're often, again, kind of going back to one of the points there about stealing and lying. They might have swiped the card. They might have gotten an older friend to get a card. They might have a card themselves that the parents provided them for emergency purposes, and they're using it for sports gambling. So I think those are the key ones. Definitely begins to sell personal stuff, borrows money, steals and lies. Definitely want to watch out for any large amounts of cash, appearing to be distracted or anxious and moody or depressed. Again, when there's a pattern to it. And then I think the big one definitely has an obsession with sports scores. That indicates that there might be a gambling addiction. So those are the signs of teenagers that might have a gambling addiction. So now we've talked about the signs. We've talked about some of the causes. Let's finish up here and talk about some possible solutions. So I am actually getting this information from from the gambling site for Illinois. It's called playillinois.com, and they've actually put this information on their site about how to resolve issues with teenagers that may be gambling in your family, in your community. And the biggest thing and the most important thing, kind of when we were going through some of the signs, is to have the conversation. That's the first thing you want to do. Don't let it be a situation where you go, I'm not going to bother him. I don't want to deal with him or her. She's so moody. She's evil. We know, the baby turns from a teenager to a meanager, right? We know, right? We've all been there. We've all been teenagers. They go through that transformation, and then, eventually they get out of it when they get older. But don't be intimidated by that, because there could be a serious problem. So start the conversation. Choose the right time to talk, right? It can't be, during the height of maybe the moodiest of reactions, right? Let's try to figure out a good time that you can talk to kind of really dive into what's going on. Now, this is key, and this is just key information dealing with teenagers with anything. You have to actively listen, right? Because we as parents, we know that we want to just pour in all of our wisdom and knowledge, and we want to talk and talk and talk. You have to actively listen. You have to take that information in first, so then you can properly address it. If you're cutting the teenager off and you're not letting the teenager talk, they're not going to be willing to share with you the information that you are seeking. So it's important that you are actively listening so you can then properly respond. Keep the conversation short. You don't want to go get long-winded and go down the road. When I was a kid, keep them short. Remember, teenagers' attention span, especially these days, very short. After a while, they can't even hear you because you're talking so much. So keep the conversation short, be relevant. Talk about interests that they have and try to equate that to what the potential problem is, so the conversation is relevant. Don't start talking about, what you were doing in 1978 and things of that nature, or 1985 or 1995. Keep it relevant to the child, to the teenager. Once you get this information, talk about the risk. Hey, listen, this is not just, gambling. I know you think it's innocent, but kind of give them some of the risk that come along with gambling, and talk about how this can lead to other things, right? Because it may start off, and again, I'm talking about sports betting, but it can be any type of betting, right? I mean, your kid could be walking down to the corner store to get a scratch off. That could lead to then, getting into online poker. Then they're playing in the dice game. It continues to elevate, just like anything else. This could be a gateway to something else. So you want to talk about the risk about that. And especially the online games, because some of these online games that are on the apps, sometimes it's not for money, right? It's almost like kind of building them up to begin to bet money. So they might win coins or something, but that's also a form of gambling. So you want to definitely watch that. Definitely talk to them about hiding the signs of gambling, hiding debts. It just leads to more and more anxiety and issues for the child. And so you want to help to alleviate that. And then, of course, lead by example, right? Teens learn from their parents. So how you talk and how you act oftentimes is going to be a residue effect for your child. So many adults have gambling problems too. So, if you are struggling with a gambling problem yourself, you definitely want to be able to address that within yourself. And then, of course, you'll be able to address that amongst your child as well. So that's kind of all of the information that I wanted to give today. I just thought, again, that this was a conversation that needed to be had. Like I said, there's been some coverage of it, spotty coverage of it, but it hasn't been to the level that I think it needs to be addressed, especially now because as the temperature gets colder, everyone is back in the house. Teenagers get bored. They start seeking out things to do, and the accessibility that phone or that tablet or that laptop provides them can really create detrimental issues when it comes to gambling and in particular sports betting. So keep that in mind. If you or anyone has an issue with gambling, let me provide this number. This is for the National Council on Problem Gambling. You can call them at 1-800-522-4700. Again, that's 1-800-522-4700. And they will be able to assist with your challenges, with your teen's challenges regarding gambling. All of their calls are 100% confidential, so feel free to call in for yourself or with your teen, or to encourage your teen to do so. So that is my time for today. I do hope that this information was helpful and enlightening. Again, please share this information. Unapplied knowledge is just wasted information. So please share the information. I'm sure it will help somebody today. If it helps one person, then we've done our job here at the People's Voice, and I'm satisfied with that. If you want to connect with us, please feel free to reach out to me on our socials. You can reach me at I am Trey Evans. That's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Also, you can reach us at the show Instagram, which is Trey Be Talking. And then also Trey Evans, the website. You can reach me there as well. Please leave a comment, give feedback. All feedback is welcome. We are here for the people because we are the people's voice. So thanks again. That's my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the people's voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. People's voice.